Hello everyone, and welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I am your host, Jeane Slone. I am the author of 3 historical fictions, She Flew Bombers, She Built Ships, and She Was an American Spy during World War II. Today in our studio, I would like to introduce Gary Griffith, author of The Legend of the Ship Captain's Box, a gold rush story. Welcome to WriterSpeak, Gary.
Thank you for having me.
He taught Californian and U.S. history for many years to hundreds of emerging writers and has taught writing since 1988. Gary has worked with the California poets in the schools for the last 25 years and has received several teaching awards, including Educator of the Year in 2003 from the Sonoma Valley Education Foundation. His published works include collaborations on 2 independent Californian science textbooks. Gary is currently a 4th grade teacher and a consultant with the Exploratorium in San Francisco. So tell me, what inspired you to write this interesting historical novel, and did it have to do with your interest in the gold rush?
Well, the gold rush is in the state curriculum for 4th grade. And so one day we were talking about things about the gold rush, and the question came up, what was the largest gold boulder ever found? And so I had the kids start researching on the computer, and they found that, and then we started discussing about what happens to people who find a boulder of gold that big, and that's kind of what started it. And I started thinking about a book that would be a good read aloud for my students. That's how it started.
Oh. So tell me, how big was that boulder?
195 pounds.
Wow. That must have been very interesting for everybody to discover.
Yes.
Especially when we go there and try to see if we can get some gold and can only come up with little specks.
Right. Well, you know, when the kids found out, it was like, wow. I couldn't believe that there could be something that large.
That must have been fascinating.
Yeah, so it was almost like they found it themselves.
What age level is this book geared towards?
Well, originally I started like I wanted to be a 4th grade book, but really the vocabulary is a little more difficult, so probably middle school and above.
Oh, that's
was
good.
What I would think.
And adults.
And adults, yes.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating that you were able to pull that off. But I can see in reading the book that it would be good for 4th graders, but the advanced vocabulary then keeps older people interested in the story.
Yes.
Our audience would love to hear you read a part of your book.
Sure. I reached into my tack box for my riding boots while my young dog Sweet Pea awaited gratification and bumbled against my feet. Stop it! As Sweet Pea cowered, I forced on my riding boots with an ornery scorn. I mounted Bluebell and turned her around, my mind still grinding upon the memories of Garland. With a kick of my boots, Bluebell and I sprinted out of the barn, down the lane, and into the woods. Finally, I slowed Bluebell to a primping jaunt and came to a large spread of toothwort at the edge of the lane. I stared languidly into the backdrop of a vibrant green foliage. Bluebell slowed to a stop as cicadas sang from the trees. Entranced, I continued to drift in thought, as if chewing upon the fate of Garland, my aunt, and my piano. I noticed the paper white butterfly dancing in the air. It circled my head 2 times and then threaded in the air in front of my face, as if in slow motion. I sat there on Bluebell, transfixed by the deep chocolate branch-like markings on the fluttering white wings. Suddenly my upper lip began to perspire. It was well known that if a paper white circled your head, romance was in the air, and that made my skin flushed and full. When I was 15, I asked Levi why it meant that romance was coming. His response was, well, because of the butterfly's name, Paris virginius. I said, in English, please. Paris virgin, Levi said, as he began to laugh deep and full. I thought, just like a man to name a butterfly a Paris virgin. I continued down the lane and turned onto Boston Post Road. My thoughts turned to Ashley, my ever-absent beau, or so I felt, even though he visited every Saturday and Sunday. The rest of his time he spent working for his father's business. My mind drifted to my hope of him asking for my hand in marriage, and then to the presents that he had promised upon his return from New York. I thought, could they be wedding gifts? The drone of insects soothed me into a slight reverie as I came to a turn in the road. I encountered a horse tied to a sapling. As I approached, I glanced to the left, and 50 yards beyond, I saw a hat in the brush. Is it Ashley? Is that the horse from his father's stable? My eyes quickly scanned the saddlebags. Why, it is Ashley, I thought. The saddlebags were full and hidden with promise. My heart swelled in exhilaration. It was that pretty Paperwhite. My heart raced. He has brought me gifts, I thought. I slid off Bluebell to investigate. Focused on the bags, I approached to open them, carefully watching the hat in the distance turn with a slow elegance. I took a step forward and stepped into a snare which grabbed my ankle as the horse spooked and tugged on its rope. The snare hurled me upside down as I gave a startled scream while the sapling of maple snapped sharply with a crispy September twang. The force inverted my world, and I saw tumbling hues of celadon blinking. I found myself upside down in my new delaine dress with its white lace collar and cuffs, now a tent covering my face. I heard a loud, boisterous laughter which leapt out from the forest. Ashley, you get me down this instant. The laughter continued. Ashley, I said, now, this is not a laughing matter. Well, you do look rather funny hanging there in those pretty little bloomers of yours, said the stranger. Who are you, and what are you doing here? I am Daniel Benet, and I was simply relieving myself after the first leg of my journey to New York. Who is Ashley? He asked. My Ashley is a gentleman, and which you are not. I began to cry. Daniel said curtly, stop that, you're beginning to scare the horses. Calm down and I'll cut you loose. Tell me, lady, were you trying to go through my saddlebags? Is that why you're in this snare? I thought you were Ashley. He's bringing me gifts from New York. With one quick stroke of his blade, I dropped 2 feet onto my head in a disheveled heap upon the wet earth of September. As I struggled to get up, all I could say was, oh my God, look at my dress, and I continued to cry. Daniel said, let me help you, and gently took my arm. My eyebrows narrowed into a furrowed row, my voice pouncing into the forest. Do not touch me! Resolved but embarrassed, I turned to face him. My face, hair, and dress were freshly splattered with mud. Daniel once again began to laugh. My face now flushed and hot. I found myself transfixed by his eyes, which were a piercing shimmer of aquamarine, contrasted against the Atlantic sky like a dragon wing. At this moment, for the first time in my short life, I was speechless. He held out his handkerchief to me, but I did not notice. He stood there and watched me, still with my blue silk bonnet, until I said, thank you, and took the handkerchief. My eyes, I'm sure, reflected his heartfelt smile with an unknown clarity. As I gleaned the mud from my face, it revealed an Irish flush of exhilaration, flooded with embarrassment, but I continued to maintain my composure. I'm Benet, Daniel Benet, at your service, madame, he said, and offered his hand with ultimate respect. Suddenly I found myself falling into his pupils, and I saw that his stood out like the dot for the letter I. Instantly he seemed flushed with a giddy nervousness I had never seen. The moment, which felt as if it would last forever, surfaced like an upwelling spring, lost and forgotten, and then I handed him his handkerchief and said, thank you, Mr. Benet, Daniel Benet, he repeated. You're most welcome. Tipping his hat, he continued, I'm sorry. And you are? With sarcasm dripping like maple sap, I returned, McCarthy, Claire McCarthy. I turned to Mount Bluebell and continued, "Good day, Mr. Benet. And also to you, Mrs. Ashley. Watch your step now," he teased, tipping his hat once again, and suddenly my hand darted out and gave him a quick slap on the cheek. My eyebrows rose, my eyes shooting arrows. I said, "How dare you speak to me in such a manner?" With that, I mounted Bluebell and turned to face him, my blue eyes full and impudent, as I said smugly, "He's not my husband." I gave Bluebell a swift kick and rode off.
That was a great part.
Thank you.
I really liked your accent too. It seemed to be time in the time period, very much so. And your descriptions.
Oh, thank you.
That's what I like about the whole book. I think you have quite a few original descriptions that I can tell.
Yeah, I've really worked hard on, sitting back, trying to, like I'm the reader, and wanting to see the expanse of the countryside or the room or the clothing. And so I had a lot of fun doing all that research.
Yeah, that's the best books, is when the author is there and is placing the reader there. Mm-hmm. Very good. What I found interesting about the book is how you change time periods. There's 1997, then there's 1800s. And that's not easy to do. How were you able to do that? Did you find it hard at all?
I worked on it quite a bit, and I just kept refining it and refining it. And originally I had just a story of the 1800s. And then I really got this epiphany of connecting the present with the past. Yeah. And then together the present and the past forges the future for the present. And so I ended up with some new characters, and I put it all in together and weaved it, and it became a story.
I think that technique is probably handy for the fourth graders, because they're not just stuck in a time zone they're kind of maybe unfamiliar with, and they can go back and forth and understand it more.
Yes, and I've read it to several classes, and they really connected with the two children in the present, and it really kind of helped them connect the major themes that were present, not only in the present family, but the family in the past.
It was very well done.
Thank you.
I also was very intrigued by the cover of the book. I thought it was interesting, all the details in it. Did you design the cover or have input in the cover design?
Well, I was working with some people back in New York, and so they wanted me to give my ideas for the cover. So I started off with the characters' faces, and I printed them all out, and then I started tearing the paper, and I kind of made a collage, and I had several ones with like 5 characters from the past, and then 2 characters from the past, and then so anyway, it all centered around the ship captain's box, and
which is important because of the title.
Yes, and there's a map of the Yucatan Peninsula. There's in 1850, the only way they communicated was through letters, so we have the letters, and so I had got red paper, and I had copied letters, and I just kind of started tearing, playing with it, took a picture of it, and sent it to New York, and this is what we came up with.
Well, that is, I had no idea how you would answer that question, so that's why it is so very different and elaborate in a way.
I think they interpreted my vision pretty well.
That's wonderful. It's nice when the author certainly can have input on the cover, that's for sure.
Right, and after all that work, when I finally got the book, it was, wow, it's beautiful.
You liked it right away. Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you must have done a good job in portraying to them what you wanted. Mm. Yeah. I was curious as to the main character of your book, or any characters for that for that matter, are they modeled after anybody you know?
Well, that's an interesting question because a lot of people who know me who have read the book, they said, well, you're in every character. And I thought, I never had thought about that. But, you know, it's pretty much fiction. Actually, when I finished reading it, I was calling it historical fiction, but then when I was done, I thought, well, I think it's really a historical romance. And I was thinking, isn't that odd that it would end up like that? But the great-grandmother in the story was a lot of my grandmother. Or both grandmothers, basically. So, I mean, if I was going to say that I use someone in my life, it would be them.
Isn't it fun to do that? Because then you immortalize the person in words.
And the thing was that really made me travel back to all the special moments that I had with them.
And so that makes it real.
Right.
What authors have inspired you? I know one in particular has inspired you.
You mean you?
No, not me.
I would say Gerald Haslam.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a professor of mine at Sonoma State, and he writes about California. And I really had a nice connection with him, and kind of inspired me to start writing. And so I've written poetry for years, and so I just was wanting to write fiction, and I held short stories in my brain for years, and so now I'm getting them down finally.
Yeah.
Another, Mark Twain, Jack London, those were two of my favorites. I worked at Jack London State Park and was able to interpret his work and read a lot of his work, and so that was also a nice foundation.
What is your favorite part of the writing process?
Boy, those moments when the words just spill out onto the monitor, and it's just, wow, I just wrote that. And the other part, especially with this book, was the research. I spent a lot of time at the California State Museum in Sacramento and got to know the librarians by name, and they with my name, and just sitting in there for hours was reading letters and old newspapers from Sacramento.
Oh, that's great.
And all the letters that people wrote back and forth, because there was no any other communication. And the letters took months to get there. So there was always kind of a break. And so I tried to emulate that in this book with the letters that Daniel and Claire wrote back to their
And that gives you the vocabulary of the time.
Yes.
Because you got to read the primary sources.
Yes.
That's wonderful that you were able to look at the primary sources. It's so much fresher and more exciting than just reading what's on the internet. You know.
Yes.
Just looking at the handwriting I find fascinating.
Yes. They had a really good handwriting.
Yes, a big difference. We don't have to have good handwriting.
Yes.
So now we know your favorite part of the writing process. Have you experienced writer's block before?
Not necessarily writer's block. It has been more of just finding time in my life for writing. And a lot of times with this, when I first started out, it was, I would have left the computer, and days later I go back, and then I spend all the time allotment I have trying to figure out where I was going with it.
Yeah.
So I just said to myself, it was, I guess, around Christmas time, and I said, I was thinking about, you know, New Year's resolutions, and that would be a reachable goal. And I thought, well, you know, if I just sat in my classroom every day after school till 5 o'clock and wrote, I could be done by June. And so that's what I did. And I got into a rhythm, and once I had that rhythm, I could, when I sat down in the chair, I was hitting the ground running because I was right there with the story. And so that was very empowering to be able to do that.
Yeah, you're right about the rhythm, because once you get away from it, you have to then really reread everything you wrote instead of picking up where you left off. So then it's a constant rereading, and so then it goes slower. So that was wonderful that you figured that out.
Yes.
But it is really challenging to write when you work full-time.
It is.
Yeah. So I admire you for doing that. I think I never wrote when I worked full-time.
When my mother, she used to always say, Gary's always happiest when he has a full plate. And that's really kind of been my life. I kind of, I'll have a full plate and I'll get tired of it, and then I'll take something off the plate, and before I know it, I've got something else replacing it. So that's just my personality.
I guess she knew your personality. Yeah. I bet you're working on another book.
I am. I have 2 books that hopefully will be out next year, in 2016. I'm about ready to send this one to the editor, and it's called The Traveler's Imagination. And it's about this traveler who travels to London and then to Italy, and he goes to a comedy club and he sees these people. And he's been to a comedy club before, so he doesn't sit near the comic or the stage because he knows what happens. Every routine, they always pick on the people closest to them. And so the comedian does this. So anyway, he ends up in Italy, and he keeps running into these couples. And you could sit at a park bench and you look at people walk by and you make judgments by the clothes they wear or little snippets of conversation, or you're in a restaurant and you see how they order food or how they eat, and you make judgments and assumptions about their lives. So he uses his imagination to describe these couples and the journey in Italy.
Sounds like you're working on something totally different than what...
Yes, it's a lot of art, a lot of food, and a lot of chaos. And I have another one, a children's book, and I'm working, trying to get an illustrator to do the illustrations, and it's called Stuart Washington and Bob Lincoln, the Sharpest Pencils at Bestwood School. And so that was a real fun one. I wrote that in like days, and so it's pretty hilarious.
What level is that?
That'll be probably 2nd grade to adult. Yeah.
Wow, very fascinating.
Yeah.
And all 3 books are not alike.
And I'm working with an actress right now who we're about ready to go into the studio in the next few weeks doing the audiobook of The Ship Captain's Box. Oh. So that's going to be an exciting project too. Yeah.
Audiobooks I have dabbled in that myself. It's a good idea. I always say I have an audiobook for those who only like to listen.
Yes, that's right.
What would be the best advice you would give an inspiring author? Probably let's say a student, really, on writing.
Well, I think a storyboard's always a good place to start, but also I'm kind of in favor of just banging the words onto the page and see what it comes up with, and then worry about the organization later. I mean, it just depends of your style. I've used both.
Can you explain that, storyboard?
Well, it's time, place, setting, the characters. What do you want to have happen to the characters? How are they going to come together in the story? How will the story end? What are your ideas? But a lot of times those things switch. Mm-hmm. And I ran through several storyboards with this book. Yeah. And so it's all about just kind of keeping your thoughts organized. In my office, I would have Post-it notes and pieces of paper, just little reminders for me, that little snippets that get lost in my head in the movement of it all. So it's kind of, I would suggest having to look at things. You know, in the classroom, we always have things for students to look at and reminders about what they're supposed to be learning. Mm-hmm. But we never do it for ourselves as educators. And that's one thing that I've learned in my teaching is, if there's something I want to remember, I put it on the board so I'm looking at it all the time.
That's really good suggestion. Where would we be able to buy your book?
Well, you pretty much can buy it at any independent bookstore. They'll order it for you. I have my book on consignment in several locations with signed copies. It's on iBook, it's on Kindle, and Amazon.com.
Thank you, Gary, for sharing your book with us, The Legend of the Ship Captain's Box, a Gold Rush Story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate really being here. Thanks for having me.
WriterSpeak is produced at the C Media Labs in Santa Rosa. We'd like to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for an interview with a talented author.